today where we often get distracted with everything that's around us. I'd like to talk about mindfulness. So, what does it mean to be mindful?
So, Ustaz Mateen, you mentioned a very important word there, which is distractions. I think mindfulness, as far as I understand it, is simply being present and being aware of what you are doing at that very moment, of your surroundings. And of course, it's easier to understand it from its opposites, which is essentially being distracted. So if you think of all the situations we are in today, right? Well, one may say that we are exposed to a lot more distractions today than in the past, simply because we have access to so many other things in a lot easier way and with so much more proximity than in the past. By that we mean our gadgets, our sources of entertainment or information all around us, and also our schedules, a lot busier with a lot of expectations. So there is an increasing sense of our inability to remain focused in that very moment. Often people relate focus or being present with big things that they need to do, for example, like work or even study and those kind of things. But mindfulness is essentially being present all the time in every single thing that you do. So when I'm having this conversation with you, I'm present here. Of course, with the very big sort of objective of getting people to listen carefully to your words. I think we are present by the sheer aim that we have, which is essentially say the right things, right? But in many other moments when we speak or when we listen to other people, we might easily get distracted. So our mind, the simple way of thinking about it is our mind strays away, goes somewhere else.
Yeah, quite easily, in fact.
Very easily. So mindfulness is about being present, about being aware, and have your mind. So the word mindful itself means, you are aware that, you are there doing a certain thing, and giving it its fullest attention.
So, talking about being present, sometimes we'll also not just get distracted with everything that revolves around us, but also sometimes with our past and also with things that may come. We're busy about thinking about what is to come next and so on. Talking about all of these that revolves around the idea of being mindful. How does our religion actually teaches us to be mindful, and how is it very significant, in fact, in our religion?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question, because I think the idea of mindfulness has been recently popularized in a lot of Western literature and Western practice of mindfulness, and essentially it's about how to deal with the demands and cultures of modern lifestyle, which is extremely busy, hectic, and a lot of distractions around you. So people feel a sense of unease and unsettledness, right? Whatever you do. So even at or in instances where people tend to think that it's an entertainment, even then they don't feel fully satisfied.
Yeah.
Because the mind is not there. Right? So the idea of mindfulness became popular, but in our tradition, and in fact in many religious traditions, mindfulness or being aware and being present is one of the core foundations of religious practice. So in our tradition in Islam, although we may not use the word mindful in that sense, right? In the modern sense of the commercial sense, if you like, the commercialized sense, but we have always had this important teaching of being present and aware of what you do from the very first moment. So if you think back at our practices, one of the core things we are taught in Islam is niyyah, intention. In fact, I remember, when I learned about mindfulness in the modern context, in the mindful practice, mindfulness, one of the first things they will teach you is, if you attend a session, you sit around people and you do some breathing exercise, meditational exercise, but just to observe your breathing. They always start with, place your intention in your heart. Why are you here? And we know that intention in Islam is one of the most important foundations, because the Prophet ﷺ said, and in a lot of hadith books, you always start with this first hadith, innamal a'malu bin niyat wa innama likulli imri'in ma nawa. That all actions, all deeds, especially good deeds, they are contingent on the intention that you place on the deed. So what makes an act different from another act? Or you have two doers, two different people doing the same act, but what makes that particular act special or of a higher stature in the eyes of God is the intention. وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى. So everyone will be judged, rewarded, assessed according to the niyyah, right? And niyyah starts right from the beginning. So if you look at all the practices in Islam, all our actions, our teachings, we are asked to place the right intention, the niyyah, in our hearts. And that is essentially to tell us that you must be present for that act. So when we want to pray, salah, we perform the prayer, the first thing is to place the niyyah, right? So usalli farda zuhri arba raka'atin ma'muman, if you're a ma'mum follower, or ada'an lillahi ta'ala, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, a lot of people struggle with being very mindful and aware during prayer. In other words, putting 100% focus on prayer. This idea of khushu'. So a lot of people say, I can't be mindful, or I can't be fully present. My mind strays away, and how do we get khushu'? And you will see a lot of workshops, lectures, classes, how to gain khushu'.
A common struggle, huh?
Yes, but the answer is there, because we start from the word go, that when we stand before Allah, when we stand in prayer, we stand because that is a time that we stand before God, lillahi ta'ala, for God, and we place the niyyah right from the beginning. And that niyyah, that intention helps us to be aware of the actions that we will be performing until the end. So it is there, but one of the reasons possibly that we have struggled with it is because the problem with niyat and many other things in Islam, it has become something more of an expression, or it's an articulation of or an expression which becomes part of the pillars, for example, the arkan salah. So we are obsessed about the fact that we must mention it, recite it, the lafaz, we must recite it, but we forget its main and real significance, which is essentially to ground us in that moment that we are praying before God, or we are standing before God. And in fact, if you look very carefully, all other actions, right, in Islam, you are taught to, when you leave your house, there's a prayer. When you enter your house, there's a prayer. When you want to eat, there's a prayer. When you want to enter the gents, the washroom, there's a prayer. Every single thing, there's a prayer. Prayer is, yes, we ask for blessing, but prayer also means that we are placing our focus and attention that very moment for that act. And it starts from there. So there are a lot of teachings in our religion which essentially is about being present and aware of that very moment. And, you focus on that particular act or deed. And, the reasons why sometimes we get easily distracted, of course, we as human beings, we have a lot of thoughts.
Yeah.
Our brains are extremely powerful.
To be very occupied with these thoughts.
Yeah, a lot of thoughts. So often we are bombarded with thoughts of regret, or fear, regret of what's past, and then fear of what's next, the unknown. So we often worry. The word is worry, right? We worry about this. We worry about a lot of worries now. So there is a tradition I was taught by my teacher. Ma madha fat wal mu'ammalu ghayibun wa laka sa'atu allati anta fiha. Ma madha fat, right? The past fat is gone, right? In other words, no point harping about it in terms of regret and I should have done this, I should have done this. وَالْمُؤَمَّلُ غَيِّبٌ, and what you might hope for, what you might aspire for. I mean, planning for it is good, but what you're hoping for is ghayib. You can't see it yet because it hasn't happened, right?
Hidden.
Yeah.
In a sense.
Yeah, it's ghayib. So yeah, hidden, or it's not. It hasn't happened yet. But what you have, walaka as-sa'atu allati anta fiha. The very moment you're in now is what you have. That's within your control.
Wow.
So if we focus every time on the present, that is where we are able to be fully mindful of the moment, the time that God has given you right now, this very moment. I think that's usually our weakness. We tend to fret about the past, that has happened, so we talk about it a lot. That's not the same as saying we learn lessons from our weaknesses and failures. But if you keep talking and thinking about what's gone past, and it incapacitates you. So you think about it too much that you can't move forward. And that happens to a lot of people. وَالْمُؤَمَّلُ غَيْبٌ, there are also another group of people, and maybe even ourselves, at some point that we keep thinking about, tomorrow. And sometimes when you have a meal, right, and you have a lunch or something, you start talking about dinner. And you're eating right now. So I think you should focus on the food that you have. Enjoy that meal. And then when dinner time comes, and you start thinking about it. So that is the practice of mindfulness, which I think is in every aspect of our lives as Muslims. It is about being present. It is about being aware of our present moment. It is also about appreciating every single thing that is happening right now. I think we gave this example before. Sometimes 2020 has been a very strange year, right? Because of many things that we have been so used to, we are unable to do now. So today, for example, we are talking about end of the year, and you can't go on holidays, and everybody is complaining about it. You can't travel. Yeah. So we are doing exactly what is counter mindfulness. Why? Because we are talking about the things we cannot do. So it's either complaining about that, but what we have right now is the opportunities that present themselves to us right now, whether it's time to spend with your family, whether it's time to spend with yourself, whether it's as simple as having a nice cup of tea with a friend or on your own, whether it's just about walking around in your neighborhood. How many of us actually know our neighborhood very well, for example, right? So we know other cities and towns a lot better than our own neighborhood, our own backyard, our own park. The kind of, we go on holidays and we look at the mountains in New Zealand or Scotland, and we say, wow, and Switzerland, and wow, amazing mountains. But we don't even know what's, the nature that is, in our area. So that's not wrong. I mean, to travel and to enjoy holidays are not wrong, but now it's an opportunity that we can use. And I think that will help us develop a sense of gratitude, shukr for the things that we have right now, rather than think about things that we don't have.
Well, yeah, in a way to discover Singapore. I mean, this is an opportunity.
Yes, that's right.
The other thing, Mufti, I'd like to ask another question. It's the thing that we have been hearing every Friday, which is from the khutbah, ittaqullah, to have taqwa to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now I'm bringing this up because there are a lot of scholars that translates the word taqwa. I mean, they vary in terms of their translations. Some translates as being God conscious. Some translates as being being fear of Allah. But there are also some scholars who translate as being mindful of Allah. So do these translations or meaning contradict with one another, or are they actually pointing out to the same thing?
Yeah, so I think we have spoken earlier that mindfulness or being aware, khushu', is part of our tradition, also in Islam, like in many other traditions, because it's a very powerful sense of awareness in as part of our lives as human beings, which I think is important for our ability to control, what we have in our power to control in our lives, so it can bring us to good places. The same thing with taqwa. I think there are many translations of taqwa, and many of the users in the Quran, when Allah says, in fact, the very early verses we read in the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. So the book, which is the Quran, is a guide for those who have taqwa, right? Muttaqeen. So how do you translate that? Of course, the word taqwa has a lot of meanings. It is about wariness. It is about being wary of Allah's presence, mindful of Allah's presence. So what it means essentially is you are aware that God is with you all the time. Yeah. And what happens when you're aware that God is with you? If you think in a simpler way, for a young child, when you have your parents around and when you don't have parents around, right? It's you will do different things.
Yeah.
So being aware that Allah and God is present with you, or He is observing you, will certainly ensure that you will do the right things, and you will avoid the things that God has prohibited. So taqwa there is a sense of in your heart that you are aware and mindful of Allah's presence, and then it leads to your behaviors, and that's where the word righteous comes. Pious. Some people say reverent of God. Pious, those who are pious, those who are righteous. But those are the outcomes.
The result of that.
Yes, results of being aware of God's presence, taqwa. So being mindful of Allah's presence. So whether you're alone or in public, in the open or in private, you're aware that God is there, and therefore you will avoid certain things. I wanted to also mention the mindfulness in terms of awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we hear of some of the Salafus Salih, in fact the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when they pray, they were so mindful that they were completely present, that they could easily shut off from any distractions. So there's the stories of Abdul ibn Zubayr and Urwa ibn Zubayr. So for example, one of them, they were praying next to or in the Haram Sharif in Mecca, and people went to Hajj. Hajj, they were throwing the stones. So the stones were thrown left and right by his side, but he continued in prayer, not fearing for, there was no signs at all from those who were with him that he was distracted by the stones thrown at him, right? Ours is not, today it's not stones thrown at us. It's just a TV's on, or a phone call. Sometimes the smartphone starts to flash, and
we're completely distracted.
Yes, exactly. And you start to worry, who and what and so on. The other is Urwa bin Zubair. So he had to go through a surgery, and he told the doctors, you can perform the surgery when I am in prayer at his leg.
Wow.
Yeah. So now we need the GA, general anesthetic, or the anesthetic to help us go through surgeries, but they could cut off from their minds completely in the prayer when they perform the prayer. So that is the kind of taqwa that we are talking about. That you are fully aware and mindful, and you are in that very moment present for the action that you are performing. So whether it's prayer, it's anything else, that you only do it for God. I think prayer has always been the salat has always been a challenge. But if you look at another act that we often perform, which is in Ramadan, we fast. That's a very good example of an act that we are better able to be mindful or aware that God is always with us, because you rarely hear. I mean, there have been cases, especially when we are young, right? That sometimes we call it in Malay, puasa olo-olo. But when your parents are not around, or you don't see them, then sometimes you just slip in some chocolate or something because you're hungry, or you go to the toilet and have a sip of water. But most adults in particular, I think when we fast, even with the greatest temptation and hunger and thirst, we don't break our fast. And actually, if you do it, if you wanted to do it, you could have done it not in people's presence, because it's as simple as just a glass of water. You can always lock up yourself in a room and drink it.
Yeah.
But you don't, because you don't want to invalidate your fast, because you have placed a niyyah intention to perform the prayer, perform the fast, and you do it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So there are practices in Islam that will teach us to be to have the taqwa, to be aware, to be mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I think it's a lifelong practice. What I've learned in my personal life is, oftentimes you talk about hosho and mindful. Without certain practices that help you to just be aware of the moment, then you would continue to struggle even with prayer. What I've learned is, with some mindfulness practice, that has helped me tremendously even for prayer, just to be mindful. Because one of the very useful teachings in mindfulness is you observe your thought. So like we said, distractions and worries, you observe it rather than you challenge and criticize it. You observe it, but you let it pass and you guide yourself back to that moment. So that is part of the practice that we have to do. So when you pray and a thought comes by, a worry comes by, just observe it and let it pass, and then pull yourself back to the prayer. Yeah. So we don't want a situation where we pray, many thoughts came by, suddenly you're in the last rakat and just doing a tahiyat. I'm done. I don't know what the four rakats. Where was I in the 4 rakats? So we don't want that situation, and I think there is a way to overcome that.
Wow, that's really a lot to take in and summarize. Even mindfulness starts with putting our intention, and in being aware of that moment, we develop a sense of appreciation of our present, and also to be aware of the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the fact that He puts us in this, or He gives us, or He blesses us with a gift called the present. Thank you so much, Mufti. I've learned so much, and I hope the listeners have learned as much as well. Inshallah, we'll look forward for the next episode, or the next podcast episode. And with that, thank you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.